My publisher, New Society Publishing, just had a book reveal for my new book, Microbe Science for Gardeners. They did an event on Instagram and Facebook, and they encouraged people to ask questions, and then I was on live answering some of those questions. Some of those questions were really good, so I thought I'd make this video and answer the questions in a little more detail. They're all about soil and microbes, and I think you'll learn a lot from this Q&A session. Here's the first question. Does the book contain information about using a microscope to determine the good and the bad microbes in your soil, compost, or compost tea? That's a very good question. There's lots of information online about using a microbe to determine both the type and number of microbes in your soil. A lot of this is promoted by Dr. Elaine Ingram and her Soil Food Web School, and they have a really expensive course there that'll teach you how to use a microscope. Well, quite honestly, most of this is nonsense. I mean, it's a fun thing to do. You can see some of these microbes in the water and the soil, but it doesn't tell you very much. Consider this fact. We don't know how many microbes are in your soil. And the reason scientists don't know is because they're unable to identify individual types of microbes just by looking at them. It's only now that we're starting to do more DNA studies that we're getting a handle on the number, the diversity of microbes. And we're estimating there's something like 30,000 different bacteria in your soil. And quite honestly, most of them look the same. Now, sure, some are spheres and some are rods and some are rods joined together. But there's thousands of spheres and they all look the same. It's not like animals where we can see a lot of distinguishing features. This idea of using a microscope to both count and identify microbes in your soil doesn't make a lot of sense. Does mulching improve microbes in the soil? Well, it does. To understand this, we want to ask a different question. What do microbes want? Well, they want three basic things. They need food, they need moisture, and they need air. Most microbes are just like us. They breathe air. And so they need light, fluffy soil that contains a lot of air for them to live. When we use a mulch, it keeps the soil fluffy. It prevents the raindrops from coming down and pounding that soil and creating a crust on the top. That's good for microbes. Microbes also need water. Now, we talk about microbes living in soil, but they don't actually live in soil. They live in water, and they live in the water film that surrounds the soil particles. They need moisture. If it gets too dry, they either die off or they go into a state of hibernation. The proper term for that is dormancy. They become dormant until conditions improve. And the third thing they need is food. And that mulch is organic matter. It's slowly decomposing and being added to the soil, and that's microbe food. So the mulch keeps the moisture in the soil, cuts down on compaction, and feeds the microbes. So it's good for microbes. This is a very common question, and several people ask this one. What is the best way to improve microbe activity in the cheapest and quickest way possible? Well, what is microbe activity? That's just microbes going about the business of living. And I don't think that's really what this person is asking about. What they really want to know is, how do we get more microbes? It's the quantity of microbes that improves soils and helps plant growth. It's not really the activity of microbes. For them to be active, they need these things we just talked about: air, water, and food. If we want to increase the number of microbes, we have to increase the food source. That's the main thing that keeps the microbe level low. And what is the fastest and easiest way to do that? Well, first of all, there's no easy, quick way. You can't take soil that's crappy and has a low level of microbes and suddenly boost it up and have a lot of microbes. It's not going to happen. This is a slow process. We have to get organic matter in the soil. So the question is, what is the easiest way to do that? And the answer is, it really depends on what you have available. The easiest thing to use are your kitchen scraps, your banana peelings, your dead flowers from the vase you had sitting on the dining room table. All of that is organic matter. Get that in the garden. If you don't want to throw it on the ground the way it is, compost it first. By the way, if you want to learn about composting, I have a book for that too. everything you want to know about composting. Fall leaves are a great source of organic matter. Many of your neighbors are throwing them to the curb or putting them in bags and letting the city take them away. Collect those, or even encourage your neighbors to bring them over to your property. Collect them from the neighborhood. That's free organic matter. Any type of compost is great. Manure is great. Use the material that you have easy access to. Don't buy stuff that was bagged thousands of miles away and shipped to your center. Try to get it locally as much as possible. That's better for the environment. But it's not a fast process. Use it as mulch, dig it in the soil, but get the level of organic matter up and the microbes will grow. Is there a section in the book that's specific about pests and diseases and what to do about them? There is. There's a whole chapter in the book about pathogens. Now, the good thing to understand is that 80 to 90% of all microbes are good guys. They're going to help the soil improve. They're going to help your plants grow. But there are that 10 to 20% that are pathogens. They attack plants. And unfortunately, gardeners are more interested in the pathogens than the good guys. So there's a whole chapter on pathogens, how they live, how they grow, what makes them survive. There's a table that covers several pages of all of the common diseases and what you can do about them. Now, the trick with pathogens is that you really have to identify the disease that you have. Too many times online I see people giving some vague description about some blotches they have on leaves and asking for advice. And lots of people give advice. Spray this, spray that, find some stuff from the kitchen. That's a really poor way to attack the problem. You have to first identify the exact problem you have. If you don't know what pathogen it is, you don't know what solution to use. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, beginning gardeners are too anxious to grab something and spray. And most of the time it does nothing. And in some cases it even harms the plant. Identify first, then decide if you actually have a problem. Every plant has pathogens on it. They all have spots on their leaves. It doesn't mean you have to solve the problem. So figure out how important this problem is. How serious is it to your garden? And only tackle the serious problem. I grow 3,000 different things in my garden, and I have almost no pathogens that I worry about. I have lots of pathogens. Don't get me wrong. I just don't worry about them. It's part of nature. And I try to build healthy soil. And the good guys in there, the good microbes, they help fight the pathogen. For the most part, I let nature do its thing. And I don't worry about it. What types of mulch are best to help build healthy soil? When starting new beds, like raised beds, what can you do to increase the health quickly? You notice this question is similar to one of the others, and the word that pops out to me is the quickly part. It's really too bad that in today's age, everything has to be done quick. When it comes to soil building, there is no quick solution. Now, there's lots of videos online that will tell you how to fix problems quickly. They're all a bunch of baloney. Soil improves slowly. Building good soil structure takes years, not weeks. Your job as a gardener is to get the process started, and you do that by adding organic matter to the soil. Organic matter feeds the microbes build good soil. It's a simple solution, but it's not fast. Now, which mulch is best? Well, the one that you have readily available, probably. Use what you have. But in general, I like wood chips for ornamental beds and straw for my vegetable bed. And I have videos on both of those topics. What about microbes in containers? Is that important? Do they help plants? Well, let's take a step back. The one thing we have to understand is that microbes are really important for plant growth in nature. Out in the woods, there's microbes in the soil. They're helping to feed the plants. They're helping the plants grow. Those are really important microbes. Now we come to our garden, and most gardens are very artificial. Our ornamental beds are more natural. We plant things and we leave them alone. Our vegetable bed, we tend to dig up. It's an annual thing. We harvest, we disturb the soil. In that case, microbes are less important. We're also fertilizing a bit more. When we fertilize, plants don't need the microbes. In fact, what happens is that the plant will be growing. And if it doesn't get fertilized, it starts using the microbes to get nutrients. If we add fertilizer, the plant says, hey, I suddenly have an easy source of nutrients. I don't need the microbes anymore. So it stops harvesting the microbes for food. It uses the fertilizer instead. Now that takes us to these potted plants. Our house plants are not in soil. They're in a soilless mix. It has nothing to do with soil. And most of the discussions you see about soil have nothing to do with the material in our houseplant pot. Now, there are microbes in there, lots of bacteria, some fungi. Sometimes you even see the little mushrooms growing in your pots, which is just fine. Enjoy that. In an artificial situation like a potted plant, the plant does not rely on the microbes in the soil. It's relying on the fertilizer you add. So in potted plants, microbes really aren't that important. Use synthetic fertilizer, feed your plants regularly, and they grow great. How much does tilling affect soil microbes? Does it depend on how deeply you till? That's a very interesting question. And for years, scientists have been telling us that tilling harms microbes. Well, more recent research is changing that opinion. So let's have a closer look at this. When we till the top 6 inches, if that, and we disturb the soil. Now that doesn't do much to bacteria. Bacteria are very tiny. You're not going to harm them. You're just going to move them around and they're fine. Fungi, on the other hand, are these long filaments, and they actually get chopped up. So what we find is that if you start tilling on a regular basis, you do see a drop in fungus. And those fungus are important to soil. So it does harm the fungi. The other thing that happens is that when you're tilling, you expose the soil, you add lots of oxygen in there, and you actually speed up the decomposition of the organic matter. And for a long time, we thought that was bad for soil because the organic matter level was dropping. And as you know now, organic matter is microbe food. If the level of organic matter drops, the population of microbes also drop. So that sounds like a terrible thing. But more recent research have found that if we look lower down in the soil, the 6 to 12 inch layer, we're actually seeing an increase in organic matter. So it's decreasing from the top layer, but increasing in the bottom layer. And the total amount of organic matter isn't really changing. So it's possible that these microbes are just moving down deeper into the soil, which might actually be good for plant roots. So tilling is not great for microbes, but it may be doing much less harm than we originally thought. What tilling does do is that it destroys the structure of soil, the aggregation of soil. So here's the poor microbes working hard to make better soil. You come along with a tiller and you destroy that structure. Okay? Tilling is counterproductive to what the microbes are doing for us. And that's the reason you should not till your soil. Are coffee grounds good for microbes? Well, coffee grounds are organic matter. All organic matter is food for microbes. So yes, they will help microbes grow. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing on social media is people making outrageous claims about coffee grounds. For some reason, they're this magical stuff that makes things grow really well. That's simply not true. Coffee grounds are just like all the other organic material. It slowly decomposes, feeds microbes, releases nutrients. Nothing special about it, except for one thing. Coffee grounds do contain caffeine, and that caffeine can prevent seedlings from growing. Unless you use huge amounts, it probably won't affect larger plants, but it will affect seedlings. So don't put it in your vegetable garden if you're planting seeds. The best way to use coffee grounds is to use it as a very thin mulch, or even better, compost it first and then add it to your garden. As an aside here, there's lots of videos and lots of information online about special organic material, things like banana peel. All that stuff is nonsense. None of these organic materials are better than the others. On a molecular basis, all those cells are the same. They all have the same proteins. They all have the same nutrients. They're all about equal. Doesn't matter where the organic matter comes from. This is an interesting question. What are the main differences between a bacterially dominated soil and a fungally dominated soil, and which is better for your garden. There's this idea out there that the amount of bacteria to fungi, that ratio of those two, is important for plant growth. Again, this is promoted by Dr. Elaine Ingham in her Soil Food Web tool. This idea that we have to get this ratio right to make the plants grow. Woody plants, they like more fungus and less bacteria. Things like perennials and vegetables, they like it the other way around. They like more bacteria and less fungi. They even promote the idea that if you get the ratio right, you won't grow weeds. Well, again, most of that is complete nonsense. If we go out into the woods where there's lots of trees and they've been there for a couple hundred years, we do find that the ratio of fungi to bacteria is higher. There's lots of fungi in that soil. When we go to agricultural fields, we see the opposite. The fungi level has dropped, the bacterial level has gone up. But this becomes a chicken and egg question. What came first, the chicken or the egg? So what the scientists pretty much agree on now is that the plants that are growing there adjust the ratio. So if we have trees growing in an area for a couple hundred years, that woody material that comes off the trees, it doesn't feed bacteria, but it does feed fungi. So the number of fungi goes up and the relative amount of bacteria goes down. In an agricultural field, the opposite happens. Tilling, working the soil, destroys the fungi, but it doesn't harm the bacteria. So the bacterial level goes up and the fungi level goes down. So it's the way the soil is being used that affects the ratio. The ratio does not grow the plant. So as far as gardeners are concerned, ignore the ratio. It's not important. Your soil will change based on what goes into the soil and what grows there, and over time the ratio will modify. We don't care. Worry about adding food for microbes, and the microbes will take care of all this for you. One last question. What is the simplest way to replenish microbes after construction? So if you have a construction project, maybe you're even building the house, that's terrible for soil. They remove all the topsoil, they bring in heavy equipment, you get compaction. As you now know, compaction moves the air out of the soil and microbes can't breathe, and so they die. The topsoil is where all the organic matter was, and we've taken that away. So we're left with crappy subsoil. All right, how do we increase these microbes? Well, one solution that might be appealing is that you go to the store and you buy a bottle of them. And there are lots of manufacturers now that sell microbes. They tell you to put it on the roots when you're planting because plants need microbes. They tell you to put it in the soil to increase the amount. And that seems to make sense. I mean, if I sprinkle a bottle of microbes on my soil, I have more, right? Well, no, you don't actually. And there's a really important concept you have to understand. The microbes in soil are always at maximum capacity. The number is determined by the environmental condition. How much food is there? Is there enough oxygen? Is there enough water? And temperature plays a big role with microbes. But we can't control three of those very much. We can only control the food, really. So if we have really crappy soil, the amount of microbes in that soil is low. Adding more won't change that. Think about a stadium. We have a football stadium, and it's a small local stadium. It only holds 5,000 people. And on game day, it's full. All the seats are taken up. It's at capacity. Now, another 500 fans show up. What happens? Well, they can't get in. There's no seats for them. The seats are full. Well, soil's like that. Soil is always at capacity. All the seats are full. Now, what about good soil? Well, good soil is like a big stadium. It holds 80,000 people, but all the seats are full. It's at capacity. Another 5,000 fans show up and want to get in. They can't get in because there are no seats for them. Soil is always at capacity. If we take a handful of microbes and put it on the soil, it does not increase the number of microbes in soil because there isn't food for them. The excess that we just added, they're going to die off. If we want to increase the number of microbes, we need to make the stadium bigger. And how do we do that? We add food for microbes. The food for microbes is what's keeping the number low. As we increase the food, the microbe population will grow. Buying microbes is not going to solve problems in the garden for you. these mycorrhizal fungi that you have. They're not going to work, particularly if you're fertilizing. Your soil has millions and millions and millions of microbes in it. In fact, 1 gram of soil, a little speck in the palm of your hand. In fact, the way I like to describe this is the amount of soil you have under your fingernails after an hour of gardening. That's 1 gram of soil. That has 1 billion bacteria in there. It has 1 million fungi, nematodes, amoebas, all kinds of microbes are living in there. You have more microbes than you know. The numbers are staggering. Don't go and buy a bottle of microbes. If you want to improve your soil, add some organic matter. There's lots more to learn about microbes. For instance, did you know that plants actually control the microbes that live around them? They control which microbes grow around their roots, and they keep the microbes that are good for them. Some of them fight pathogens, some of them provide nutrients. Plants are in control. What we've learned recently is that plants even absorb bacteria inside themselves, and those bacteria are making nitrogen for the plant. That's a fabulous story. It's all in this book. Microbes also fight each other. We talk about the good guys, the good bacteria. Well, I have news for you. All these good bacteria are fighting each other. They're using chemical warfare. They're killing each other. They're eating each other. Nematodes come along and gobble up bacteria by the hundreds. And that's really, really important for plants. It has to do with nitrogen levels in the bacteria and the nematode. What about the leaves? What about the parts of plants above soil? Those are covered in bacteria. Even inside the leaves we find bacteria. And what about seeds and flowers? Yeah, you guessed it, there's microbes there too, and they play a really important role. In fact, the mother plant takes certain bacteria and allows them to go into the seeds so they get transported along with the seed for the next generation. It helps that seedling start to grow. Microbes are really important for plant growth. If you want to improve your ability to grow plants, understand the microbes. Take care of the microbes in your garden. And this book does that. In the first part of the book, it tells you all about the microbes. And in the second half of the book, it tells you what to do in your garden to improve the condition for microbes. Anyways, thanks very much for watching. Have a great time in the garden. See you next time.